now is as good a time as ever to talk about the phenomenon of UFOs, unidentified flying objects. This is obviously, I wanted to do this episode because, believe it or not, UFOs have very much been in the news recently. You may have missed the small detail of the United States Navy confirming the veracity of a series of videos captured by Navy pilots that did seem to capture unidentified flying objects. The fact that the U.S. government is confirming that these things are real has quite a few implications, and I hope to suss out all of them with our guest. Returning again, you heard her recently discuss all of the Star Wars prequels to us, but Hayley is a resident not just of made-up, make-believe aliens and the universes they inhabited, but our very own universe and the aliens that may or may not be inhabiting our solar system and planet at this very moment. Hayley, how are you doing?
I don't want to go into that, but yeah, that's...
Okay.
I don't know how I'm doing.
Just the facts. The facts.
Yeah, I can't address that on like a factual basis.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for bringing me back to... talk about real aliens, which actually is like, that was, when I was a kid, I was terrified of like real aliens, like Greys and stuff, but I loved Star Wars, and my parents could not understand why one alien would be so popular and one other alien would be so unpopular with me. And maybe we'll get into like, what is the human revulsion to the Grey and the real aliens of the world.
Well, I mean, yeah, I still don't know whether the Grey is friend or foe, but maybe the answer is not so simpler.
It's pretty obvious when you look into its black eyes. I think, that's just me.
When you see your reflection in their black orb.
I haven't
eyes.
had regression therapy yet, so I don't exactly know, but I've got an inkling.
Well, okay, so just a word of preface to begin this episode, because obviously we have on Chapo dipped our toe into a lot of conspiracy theories over the course of the show, and I think I'm sort of at a place now where I half believe in all of them, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm a total believer. So, I'm not here to debunk or prove the existence of intelligent life elsewhere in the galaxy or their intervention in human affairs. I'm just more interested in the story itself and some of the corroborating details about it that has just cropped up. So to begin, I'd like to start talking by this recent news story, and I'm just going to read here from The Guardian. Pentagon releases 3 UFO videos taken by U.S. Navy pilots. The Pentagon on Monday released 3 declassified videos that show U.S. Navy pilots encountering what appear to be unidentified flying objects. The grainy videos, which the Pentagon say depict unexplained aerial phenomena, were previously leaked, with some believing they show alien UFOs. The Pentagon said it released the footage to clear up any misconceptions by the public on whether or not the footage that has been circulating was real or whether or not there is more to the videos, a statement on the Department of Defense website said. So it's basically they're releasing the videos just to clear up any confusion. They're releasing the videos to be like, yes, the videos are real, and that should clear up any confusion about what they are. Which seems to ask, begs more.
Speak for themselves.
I mean, it's weird. They said they finally declassified them because they determined that they did not contain any sensitive information about aircraft capabilities or secret technologies or shit like that. So they claimed it was essentially safe to not just like the videos are already released, but it was safe for them to confirm their authenticity.
Yeah.
So, and then they're just like, well, just to clear up any confusion about that. But it would seem to be like that by confirming their authenticity, they are opening the door to a lot more confusion.
Which I think is part of the intention. Yeah. But a lot of people are pointing to that as a reason to completely dismiss this entire kind of story and topic out of hand, just because it's obviously like a CIA psyop, like Chapo Trap House is. But
I think it's very true. But yeah, like especially when you're dealing with sort of big things like these, or like these big conspiracy things, it's always very hard to, when you get something that seems to be confirmation from official sources, you have to ask yourself, well, why are they being confirmed, and whether this is not some sort of limited hangout, or in confirming it, are they leading you down a path that they would prefer that you follow, rather than focus on, I don't know, the fact that they're going to give everyone's Jeffrey Epstein's cum in the COVID vaccine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But Hayley,
that's
like,
exactly what they wanted to distract from.
Yeah. But like, Hayley, just the videos themselves, like, I assume you've seen them, because you talk about like what's on them, like how they were first leaked, and like, what you think is going on here. Because I mean, like what you can see, despite the videos being pretty grainy, are objects, floating and then moving through the air in a way that defies what a normal human designed aircraft, or at least based on the technology that we're aware of, would be able to do.
So there are 3 videos. They're named Fleur, Gimbal, and Go Fast, which is just, I guess, what people in the community have been referring to them as.
Is Go Fast a reference to the famous Star Trek: The Next Generation alien species of the like submental aliens who didn't understand technology and just only wanted to, quote, go fast?
Star Trek is fash, so I haven't watched it.
Star Trek is not fash. Star Trek is utopian space communism.
No.
For the record,
if nerds who like Star Trek are listening to this, they should check out the British 70s series Blake 7, which is almost like a anti-Star Trek answer to it, in which which is about also the Space Federation, except in that version of it, the Space Federation frames dissidents as pedophiles and puts them on trial for state crimes. It's a good show to watch. Anyway, so I don't know about the Go Fast reference, but so these videos, I think they first emerged in 2017, as far as I can tell. This whole thing is quite confusing because we've been through this exact same news cycle at least twice, maybe 3 times already since 2017. So it's hard, these videos have been posted by the New York Times already, years ago. And so you've probably already seen them. And that creates a lot of confusion, I think, now, because I don't think people really know exactly what's going on with this. Basically, these videos were acquired. I remember, there was a lot of talk in the UFO community and promises of something big coming out. So a lot of people in the UFO circles worked behind the scenes to try and get this stuff released. They've been issuing freedom of information requests, trying to get these a verified release of these. They weren't able to get that, so they basically released them through unofficial channels. That's where the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences comes in, which is the
another bit of the crossover between UFO and Chapo lore is, of course, the involvement of the band Blink-182, or rather, I should say, a former member of the band Blink-182. That being Tom DeLonge. So he is
heavily involved in securing the release of these videos,
and has invested tens of millions of dollars in this. Yeah, so
he has. He has this thing.
He's not fucking around. Yeah.
To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, which is basically a research group that he has funded of scientists and theoretical physicists, people who could genuinely investigate unexplained phenomena and have some inkling of what they're actually doing, rather than the usual way it is handled, which is just by people like me who are interested in these things but have no formal education in any of them. That's usually who investigates UFOs. And so he's set up this group to actually try and get some professionals involved. And
one of the guys, or the main guy he's partnered with, is a man named Harold E. Puthoff, who is a Stanford-based engineer and paraphysiologist, parapsychologist.
Has been in the community for a long time. A lot of them are existing figures who are themselves weird guys. But there are
he has an interesting backstory. He has an interesting backstory himself, because it's like you said, he's the type of person who has like a kind of stamp of a legit academic institution and some like scientific bona fides, but has, was heavily involved with the Church of Scientology and the phenomenon of remote viewing. He ran several experiments claiming to have, basically documented the phenomenon, which have never been, of course, repeated.
Well,
he also was involved in verifying Uri Geller as having actual parapsychic abilities,
which is true.
He did the spoon thing. And,
they did those spoons. Didn't bend
Uri
themselves.
Geller. He stopped Jeremy Corbyn from becoming prime minister. Lest we forget. Is Jeremy Corbyn the PM right now? No, it's because Yuri, he put the psychic block there in time. But so yeah, like the what is it? The Institute of to the Stars.
And so basically, it is a private research group which is funded by DeLong, but also they have like a media arm where he writes in, quote marks, he writes books. Which are then sold to fund their experiments. And basically they have like this fiction department which creates books and comics and sells like TV pictures based on the paranormal research they're doing. They then create content to fund the research. So he's heavily involved in securing this release. And basically these videos have been going around since 2017. We all knew that like the veracity of them, that they were from the Navy and they were actual Navy pilots and they weren't fake and so on. Like, it was all a matter of finally, like, securing that confirmation that, yes, this is, like, an official thing. This actually exists. You have to take it.
Haters cannot say it's Photoshop at this point.
Basically. So,
and wasn't one of the pilots themselves sort of instrumental in advocating for the release of these videos?
I didn't see that. I'm mostly following like all these cranks who file freedom of information requests.
But but I would imagine in the UFO community, this is something that people have been waiting for a long time.
Well,
right? This is the Pentagon and the U.S. government.
But like I was saying, like these videos came out a while ago. We've seen it. We've had time to adjust to this, and really, if we're talking about like the UFO community, the expectations of the community and what their view of reality has moved is so far beyond like what is in these videos that they're almost, it's cute. Like, yeah, the normies can get excited by it, but if you're in this, like,
this is old hat.
Unless you're a crank, like this is kind of old hat. Yeah, because the things that you're seeing with your mind are so much more powerful and interesting than this. So like,
well,
yeah, go ahead.
Let's stick to the videos themselves, though. So just like, if you haven't seen them, like, how would you describe what is on them? Like, what you actually see?
It's mostly just shit. It's mostly not that interesting. The first video, Fleur, is like 1:16. Not much interesting. It's just like grainy. And this is the sad thing, is that with this confirmation of their veracity, we also got confirmation that the videos that are out are apparently it. Like, there is no higher quality copy of the video that is going to come out. Apparently they do not exist. This is the best you're ever going to get of these videos. So there's not a lot to go on, really. And that first video to me, it never was very interesting because it's like a white splotch on a black splotchy screen, and it's sort of shaking a bit, and there's not a lot to go on. I don't understand what any of like the markings on the screen mean. I can't tell what speed any of it is. Like, it's meaningless to me. The other two videos are interesting to me because you have the pilot commentary on the top, and that is, I think, what sort of adds some drama to it, is that you have these Navy pilots freaking out, and in like a cool way. Like, they're just like, dude, this is some cool shit. There's a fleet of alien UFOs.
Roger. There's troubleshooting. Did you box moving target? No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow.
Like they're just having a great time, and those ones are interesting.
They're in the cockpit of like an F-18 Super Hornet doing the Sean McElwee holy shit routine.
They're doing the soy face all over these things. But like these ones are interesting because it actually provides you with some context. And what they're saying is like this. What the fuck is this? Like this isn't like saying is this us? And like this isn't us. Like this is from like I'm not scientifically literate enough to really get into all that kind of side of things, but from what I was reading, the projected speed of the objects is about 22 times that of the F-18.
That's incredibly fast.
Yeah. And so like they're pretty certain they're watching these things in front of them and are pretty certain this isn't us. And then immediately, as soon as they start saying that, like the object starts like turning in, like it's stopped kind of, and is just sort of rotating itself. It's just realigning itself in midair, which as far as I know, planes don't do.
Or like, changing direction on a dime. And like,
So these are also like, if you notice, it's interesting is the shape of the objects. The first two that came out were sort of nicknamed the Tic Tac videos because the object seen kind of looks like a Tic Tac. It's like a small kind of white pill-shaped thing. The other one that came out, it's more of like it looks like a UFO. It looks like a classic like UFO.
The classic disc style
It's round.
object.
It's a UFO. But again, like it's hard to tell with these videos because the quality of them, like I don't know. It's like a tiny blurry shape that really gives very little indication of whatever the fuck this thing is. So like that's hard to say. But yeah, like, so I think the thing with these videos is it's interesting, and what it really shows is it shows that people within the military broadly encounter this unexplained phenomena. They have no idea what it is either, and enough people don't know what it is that the military is happy enough to release videos of whatever it is and be like, yeah, it's not us. I don't know. Have a look.
And also crucially, at least if you take their admission at state value, they're sufficiently inexplainable that it would not represent a threat to their interests or national security, just to sort of put it out there.
Well, that was mostly to do with they can't identify them as being U.S. property. And nothing in the video gives away anything, that they had to protect about the pilots themselves and the planes they're flying. So, I mean, there's really the videos are already out there. Everyone, we already knew where they came from. It was just a matter of getting official confirmation. And there's nothing in them that really... These are not smoking gun videos. These do not implicate the US government in a secret UFO cover-up or, covert working with a alien species. It's nothing it's interesting, but there's really nothing beyond that to it. Unless you delve into the deeper UFO lore. There's not much to it in itself, I don't think, other than... that it's weird. It's not normal.
They are showing objects moving in space in the air in a way that is that much faster than anything that we had thought possible, and not behaving like any sort of aircraft heretofore encountered or explained by.
Of course, the explanation
the Pentagon
that I've seen a lot of people jump to is obviously it's some sort of black project, it's something, and the fact that they released the video, I think, should tell people that that's not the case, because if it was, they wouldn't have acknowledged it. The military is very reticent to acknowledge any kind of black project. There are guys whose whole thing is just doing freedom information requests to basically get public acknowledgement of various black projects that the public already knows about. Because we have camera technology, things only remain secret for so long, and so there are a lot of military airplanes and things that we know about well before there's any public acknowledgement of their existence, and there's outright denial of their existence. And so if this was anything to do with one of those, I don't think they would have ever touched it. They just leave it as this
Like
thing on the internet.
if it was some generational leap in like stealth or aircraft technology, like they wouldn't be like sharing that that exists publicly with like China, for instance.
And they wouldn't even necessarily there wouldn't be a cover up either to hold it. They would just let it be a thing on the internet that cranks care about and kooks, and that's about it. And you're pretty much, I think what this does represent is that there is a segment of people within these institutions who take this thing seriously. That is what, over the last few years, there's been a number, not just videos. The other thing is there's been a lot of disclosures coming from Navy pilots about interactions with UFOs. And in a lot of those things, what they're talking about is a frustration with the way the military handles these situations, which has usually just been to ignore it and to really not acknowledge the experiences of their personnel who have these encounters. And that has actually slowly changed, and now I believe they actually have a chain of command for reporting these incidents, which do happen every now and then. And there are people within the Navy who are concerned just on a pure safety and safety for their pilots, as well as, a national security front of finding out what the fuck is going on, because they don't know.
Harry Reid, former Senate Majority Leader, was retweeting the news story about the declassification of these videos and being like, finally, we still have a lot more work to do on this issue, or like I'm pleased with these. Even Hillary Clinton promised if she were elected president that she would open up the books on the U.S. government's files on things like UFOs. Trump has even said similar things. I mean,
Hillary,
take that.
Hillary was like, she had Podesta talking about this stuff all the time.
Podesta's very into UFOs as well.
Podesta is a UFO guy. So is Bill. I mean, Bill is known to a lot of like the big figures in the UFO scene. All the grifters of the 90s know Bill Clinton. Like, all of those guys have given Bill Clinton their book. He's gone, oh, yeah, that's very nice.
So, like, they suspect he's sort of a fellow traveler?
Yeah, well, I mean, he is interested in this stuff, and there are a few UFO guys who, have had semi-regular contact with him, just talking about UFO stuff and what's going on. It's something he maintains an interest in. And yeah, I think UFO disclosure was something like, I just like to imagine that Hillary is, she's gone through who knows how many bodies, trying to get to the Democratic nomination, and this whole time, Bill and John Podesta are just talking about aliens and UFOs and how important it is that when she gets into power, she declassifies that. And she's just thinking about, which DNC employee she can have got next, but
she can have abducted next. But yeah, you mentioned earlier that by themselves, they don't really add up to a lot, independent of whether or not you accept or are aware of a deeper UFO lore in American, but broadly world culture, broadly speaking, as well.
I mean, they're suggestive, but they don't say anything. I think is that
this is not the crown jewels of everything Fox Mulder had been working his whole career to make us aware of. But why don't we talk a little bit about that deeper story, because UFO mythology is sort of runs parallel to much of the history of America in the post World War II, Cold War, and now 21st century era, where it's just after World War I, America emerged as this sort of one of two kind of competing hegemonic global powers, and a big part of that power struggle was technology involved with the space race, aircraft technology, missiles, nuclear weapons, things like that, and it involved a huge amount of testing and development of these technologies on things like gigantic secret military bases. And that is also where you get the beginnings of Roswell, which is I think the sort of the genesis story for almost all UFO mythology and conspiracy theory in our culture. So, like, Haley, what can you tell me about like how like the Roswell story, like how it began and like how it's sort of mutated over the years?
I think Roswell in itself is like, it's like the tourist trap of the UFO lore, you know. It's fine. It's fine, but it's not that interesting, I don't think. Like, it's also a trap because the people who become obsessed with Roswell lose their minds and become just very strange. Roswell basically...
The general story is that like they it was like a UFO crashed that the United States got in the New Mexico desert, or something, and the U.S. military, like Air Force, like took possession of the craft
a lot of
and
stories,
its pilot. Okay,
but basically, the thing about Roswell also to keep in mind is that Roswell in 1947 was not known to the public till much later. You know, it was not a overnight media sensation of an event that happened. You know, then it became popularized much later by investigators. You know, like, I don't think Roswell particularly matters other than being like, I guess, like kind of a inciting incident for the public's interest in the topic. But I think the events surrounding Roswell itself are not particularly interesting. Basically, is that there was some sort of crash, whether that is an alien flying saucer or, as has been claimed, like a Russian secret project. There was a book that came out a couple of years ago that claims that basically Roswell was a secret Russian aircraft that was downed and that the bodies recovered were not aliens, but experimented upon human beings who had essentially been subject to genetic manipulation by Russia, which to me is as insane as aliens. But for a lot of people, it was like, oh, finally, someone is taking a serious look at this and has come up with an actual answer. I guess like just as a slight like addendum to that, like what's fascinating to me about this is, like I said, that all of this is happening like concurrently with the development of like a massive like nuclear weapons industry, like the huge, vast proliferation of a military industrial complex and arms race in both the United States and the Soviet Union that required like huge amounts of like state investment, all kinds of like secret bases and tests. And let's be honest, and like a huge like, you know, human toll of like the lives destroyed by these various programs, like even in just the development of them, that like on its face already seems like something sinister and vaguely alien. Like the things that we already know that just the US government was up to in this period, in the post-war period and during the Cold War, there's a lot going on that was pretty rough. Like, you know, the US was like secretly experimenting on black men into the 70s and, you know, doing, making them infertile and testing vaccines and shit. Like, testing radio, like exploding like hundreds of nuclear bombs in the Nevada desert, like exposing U.S. soldiers to radioactive fallout. Without disclosing the risks.
Yeah, without disclosing. Yeah.
You know,
like just documenting the results of what it's like to experience radioactive fallout.
Like a verifiable paper record of like the sins of the U.S. empire, what it was doing in that period. So some of these things aren't unbelievable that secretly went on, and it's also we know some of these things happened. So with Roswell, I think the basic story is, there's some sort of crash. There's claims there's bodies uncovered. There are other claims that one of the bodies was found by farmers and subsequently buried in an unmarked grave. And UFO researchers have been out at Roswell trying to find this grave ever since.
Doing some light grave robbing all over the desert.
Well, I mean, like, the solution with it would be just to dig up every single grave in the Roswell area and look for aliens, but they won't let you do that. Because it's there somewhere. I mean, it's like finding Loch Ness. You drain the lake. If we get rid of the water, you can't, you know. And that's what we should be doing, is just draining the ground to look for the bodies.
Well, it's just like I said, like even absent any like an alien explanation, like all of the details of UFO lore, like they're already there, like the creation of like vast secret military bases and like networks of underground tunnels
Yeah.
and like experimental aircraft and like all that shit is like it's already
important
there.
to look at the subject like you're saying, in the context of the time, because something that comes up a lot is nuclear energy. Is the use of nuclear energy and the explosion of nuclear weapons. Basically, a common hypothesis, and this is something that people who have encountered beings have claimed was told to them, was that basically the development of like atomic power, basically from the moment that we split the atom, we basically started a process, and the explosions of the first nuclear bombs was like the signal to the outside galaxy that, hey, these people
open
are
for
fucking
business.
around. Yeah, basically. Well, so the UFO lore extends well before 1947, but that 1947 point is like where the modern UFO story begins, and nuclear energy and nuclear weapons are like key in that. What you'll get is in a lot of the 1950s and 1960s contactee experiences, which is generally speaking like a pretty common story. Someone is out at night, they might be driving down the highway, they might find themselves, for whatever reason, an insuggestion in their head to drive out to the middle of the desert. They're somewhere where there's no one else around. They have an experience where a being, either their car will fail or a being will flag them down, or they'll wander out to the desert to meet a being. Usually they'll be dressed in like a blue or silver kind of reflective shiny jumpsuit. They'll look humanoid. They'll look human. There'll be something slightly off about them. They might look tall and lanky and kind of pallid, or they might look sort of Aryan, kind of blue eyes, golden skin and hair. And usually what will happen is they'll be invited onto a craft, and then they'll be shown basically a PSA video about the dangers of nuclear energy and told you personally have to stop this from happening, and they'll be let back on their way. That happened a lot in the 50s and 60s. And it's just one point of connection with like nuclear stuff and the UFOs. The other big one is the amount of reports of UFOs over nuclear power plants and over like, I guess, is the ICBMs, they're the nuclear warheads.
Yeah, those are the intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Yeah, so over those silos as well, there's a lot of UFO reports. And this is what you'll hear a lot in the UFO community, and when I was dating a physicist and I'd tell him all the UFO stories, he'd get very angry because they don't match science, I guess. But according to UFO people, they will tell you that there's a lot of accounts of UFOs being seen over nuclear power stations and missile silos, and basically the UFOs turning them off, like turning off power to the entire facility, shutting them down. I have never found any actual paperwork to suggest this happening, but
there's sort of an anti-nuke agenda to some of these encounters.
Yeah, but if you just take the anecdotal stories at face value, what you get is this idea that aliens are like Greens Party voters in that they hate nuclear energy. They're chaining themselves up to the front of like the nuclear power station in New York State to try and stop it from being reopened.
Okay, well, which would, putting on my conspiracy brain, have a huge connection to the fossil fuel industry and the fact of what nuclear energy would put at this time, the development of it, what would it mean to them in their future of the extractive coal and gas and oil industries, creating these UFO style encounters.
I find it
their
interesting because obviously there is like a huge anti-nuclear sentiment, especially from that 60s kind of hippie generation. And unsurprisingly, the paranormal experiences of that generation all relate back to the dangers of nuclear energy. And it's something that you stop hearing into the 80s, is you just stop really hearing about that.
Yeah, like they are like do sort of like experiencer accounts in the 80s. Like how does the story shift, or how does the agenda shift?
Yeah, so
does it reflect the age?
Yeah, there's basically, I would say, like a few. It's like an Age of Empires, how there's very distinct ages, and you just go from one to another. That's basically how it is with the UFO storyline. You have this period in the 40s where it is purely mechanical. It's nuts and bolts. You have the Roswell crash. You have Kenneth Arnold, who I think is a bigger story, who is the first. I believe he's the first US pilot we know of to have reported an experience seeing UFOs. I think he was a test pilot, was the thing, and he reports encountering UFOs when he was flying a military test plane. I think he's the first pilot we can identify who had a UFO experience. During the war, of course, pilots reported experiences with the Foo Fighters, which were basically this kind of slang name in the Air Force for unknown objects. Foo Fighters are kind of interesting in that those kind of deviate from the nuts and bolts things, in that they were usually described basically like ball lightning, some sort of sphere of energy flying alongside the plane, kind of matching the speed, sort of at kind of cockpit. Basically, you look across your cockpit, you're flying over, Dresden, trying to bomb Nazi children, and you look over and there's a big ball of sentient lightning just following you, keeping an eye on what you're doing. And so you have that period, and then you get into the 50s, and that's when things start getting weird, really weird, and that's when we get the contactee experiences. We have people like Betty and Barney Hill, who are the first major contactees, who, a lot of these people were pulled off the side of the road. Some Venusians picked them up, told them about how they're integral to saving the world from nuclear apocalypse, which obviously they did because it never happened. And then that's basically the 50s is what's happening, is that everyday Americans are encountering very strange entities who tell them perplexing things about their importance and what they have to do personally to save the human race. And what the contactees usually end up doing is starting a UFO club and not really doing anything about world peace. And then you get into that goes on for a while. And then you get into the Mothman period. Of course, things get really weird, get more weird. You have John Keel, who was a huge researcher. He was the one that wrote the Mothman Chronicles and, sort of created the popularity of that story. And he had a lot of experiences that were like these contactee experiences, but weirder. And that's basically where the Men in Black stuff starts happening, is he's having encounters with strange guys in black suits wearing, driving Cadillacs, just turning up and having nonsense conversations with him and then disappearing off into the night. That's a big period in the 70s. And then the 80s is everything before the 80s is weird, but it's pretty lighthearted. It's like Star Wars Alien. It's like the Star Wars Cantina, But
you walk in there, it's a little weird, but you're like, hey, good vibes all.
Get a drink. It's
pretty much.
Vibes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can hang out there. The 80s things start getting nasty. It's the video nasties period. It's getting dark. That's the emergence of the gray.
And also the ubiquity of a kind of a sort of sexually penetrative and sort of medicalized experimentation as a trope of all of these experiences.
The
right?
sinister side of this really only becomes evident then. There are instances of sexual relations with aliens prior to the whole anal probing wave, but they usually it's usually an afterthought. sexual assault wasn't taken so seriously in the 50s and 60s. If you and your wife happen to be diddled by aliens, it's just not something you really mention in your report. It comes out much later.
Yeah.
It's just something that you cope with privately. But in the 80s,
keep that shit to yourself. Yeah,
is when like the sinister UFO wave happens. That's when like genetic experimentation, people basically being forced to have sex against their will in UFOs. That's when like the human hybrid stuff comes up. Basically, all the X-Files shit starts happening. And then into the 90s, it just goes on like that, and it gets more extreme. And then into the 2000s, we're at an interesting point where, like, the 2000s, I think, is kind of the end of that kind of activity.
Yeah.
It still happens.
Yeah, it really does seem that, like...
But
yeah.
The amount of these stories happening is much less. Even in, like, most, like, UFO documentaries and stuff that I watch, most of the stuff they're investigating happened, maybe stopped happening around 2012. Most of the stuff they're investigating are older stories and trying to investigate basically cold cases. At this point, there isn't a lot of really interesting, like, experiences going on, and there isn't the way you can look back and say there are these distinct waves of activity that happen a certain way, have a certain pattern to them, happen to a certain type of people in a certain way. You look at, the 50s, you've got contactees, you've abductees in the 80s and 90s. There isn't, like, anything I can really point to for our current period for that. So we're in this, like, weird point where, I don't know what... All of the stuff that we're talking about now is basically talking about old things that have already happened. And I don't know what exactly is happening now with the UFO. We're in this sort of unknown period, and I don't think, it'll probably be like 10 years until people start getting their regression therapy and finding out what happened to them when they were like a Zoomer.
Well, I mean, actually, like, so I was thinking like about these like sort of different waves of like how these stories sort of change as you work through the decades. And I just recently just started rewatching The X-Files, which is like one of my favorite shows when I was a kid. It still is one of my favorite shows. It's like my probably second or third time fully through the whole thing again. And like, in terms of pop culture, this was probably like
for the first time, because every other time I tried to watch it, as a kid, I was too terrified by it to keep watching it.
Yeah, there's some pretty scary shit on that show.
There's scary stuff, but also it's some fucking gruesome stuff. We just watched like the one with like the caveman hillbillies killing babies.
Oh, that one. Oh man, that one. Was it A Home? That episode. Oh man, that episode still is not shown on television. By the way, I think it only aired once on national TV on Fox. But anyway, like so, The X-Files is like probably one of the most exhaustive like pop cultural documents of this mythology that we're talking about. And of course, it was like Chris Carter and the showrunners always sold it as like being based on like real documented cases and facts and things like that. But I was just thinking about it because to me it's such a fascinating relic of the 90s, and as a show that like came on and like really tapped into the zeitgeist of that decade. And I think what accounts for it, in my opinion, is that like this is the era of like the end of history and America emerging out of the Cold War as like the uncontested like world superpower. That like all the real conflicts of the past were over. The Soviet Union had collapsed. There really was now no alternative to like liberal democratic capitalist hegemony everywhere in the world. And I think there's a certain element of like the Soviet Union as like the major global rival being there, like sort of kept us honest in a way. And with the 90s and the X-Files, it was really like a narrative about how like in the absence of any like really big other externalized enemy, like we begin to realize like everything that the United States did to win the Cold War and like, up until then, like all the darkness of that, and that really like all that like interest and kind of fear turns inward, and we begin to like look at ourselves in a way of like our own government as being alien and possessing these kind of like terrifying godlike powers and technology, and then in the X-Files narrative, literally like collaborating with like an occupying force, essentially, that
Yeah.
like they were collaborating with like the ongoing colonization of our planet by
Which is
like
like
another. Yeah.
I've been watching X-Files too, and if you want to like get an overview of the, as like I think as people in this circle call it, like the phenomena, like just the overall overarching story, you could do a lot. You couldn't do worse than watching the X-Files because it provides the cases are fictional, but they are based off real existing cases. Whether or not the actual events in them happened, like people went out and interviewed witnesses, and these things, the paper trail exists of these stories, and you get a good overview of the different types of cases that happen. Like, we spend a lot of time in our X-Files watching, me pausing it and explaining to my partner, like, what it's based on, and pulling out my UFO books and, like, showing them pictures
The
of
true X-Files.
yeah,
Yeah.
of what, like, the other
Yeah.
day, like, we watched the Scully episode where she gets her implant taken out, and, I've got the book right here of alien implants, and I can show you all the different pictures of how they look and how that all works. X-Files is, for the most part, like, also very accurate in terms of like, just like they don't really add a lot that isn't in people's like experience reports. Other than those one episode where like sometimes they portray ghosts in a very negative light. I find a lot of the time, and it's like no one's ever died because of a ghost. Like, ghosts don't murder people, so that's just one.
Yeah.
thing
It's
to
like
keep in mind.
sharks. It's like shark attacks.
Yeah, it happens a lot less than you would think. But X-Files, I think, is also really good because of that sense of mistrust it places in the government. Like, I see X-Files like Chris Carter he's a dumb guy. He's incredibly dumb. Like,
Yeah.
that's a given. But he's a dumb
That's why the
guy
show works so brilliantly.
who
Though.
he still has the right instincts, though. He still knows, he might not know all the facts, but his instincts are more right than like most like woke liberal types. He has a correct mistrust in the government, in the official narrative of any story about US history and its self-image. And
Yeah, absolutely.
also, I think what actually really, there's an episode we watched recently where it's the one where there's like this guy who can magically heal people. There's a few episodes like that. But in this one, he can magically heal people because he's like an alien human and he has these special powers. And the smoking man has him in prison, and they have like this ongoing argument between each other. And there's a whole, that I thought was really interesting because most of the time you see the smoking man as like this figure who seems to be in control of everything. And as the series goes on, you realize he's just a player in this game. And he's actually in control of very little. He's answering to like the consortium. Yeah. He's a
middle management kind of guy.
He's trying to stay like on the wheel. But to the outside, you look at it and you're like, oh, he's like controlling everything. He's sitting there mysteriously. You imagine all this stuff onto him, and that's what Mulder does. And then they have this discussion, and I think it's like the alien guys saying like, you want to be one of the commandants when the new order comes. And it's like, I thought that was like a good insight into power because I think we tend to overestimate the competence of those in power and the like what they know. And so I think that was a good presentation because it's like, actually they know only slightly more than you do.
Yeah.
And they're scrambling to maintain power and to prevent that image from, that insecurity from being publicly known. And
like, but I think both in like you think you're right, like in a fictional and then like in a more like realistic like analysis of like the people who are actually in power in our government, I think is like a good kind of heuristic to view these things with.
Yeah, I'd say like the X-Files presents like and this is what I think matters about this whole thing is the particulars don't matter. Like the facts don't matter at all. Facts rarely matter. It's like the overall story that matters and the intention and what it's kind of the insight it has. And the insight is that those in power are deeply insecure and will do whatever they can to maintain what little they have. And in the X-Files universe, it means collaborating with this kind of alien force. And to me, like, it's not that different from like fossil fuel companies knowing about the impacts of climate change keeping it secret and just like making their offshore oil rigs taller to withstand climate change. Like it's the same kind of thing. Is it just all the millionaires who will like flee to New Zealand or whatever? Like it's just they have no control over these events either. They just have the means to try and survive them and come out in a better position on top of you when they start to unfold. And that's basically is what we're dealing with currently. Like, you know, even without aliens.
And yeah, exactly. Like this is what I'm fascinated by in this is that if you like overlay the UFO narrative and like sort of UFO mythology, starting with Roswell, it's like the present. Like, if you overlay it over like U.S. history and like the Cold War and like the post-war era, no matter how you tell both stories, like the shape of them is essentially the same. And like you talk about like the how in the beginnings of this lore, like it was very tied to nuclear energy and like nuclear testing and nuclear weapons, where it's just like that. The first time we split the atom was like the starting gun, and it was like a signal like somewhere in like this universe or like other dimensions that like we had opened something that had never been done before that like, you know, changed everything. It let something into our reality. And, you know, that was of course also dramatized in the Twin Peaks: The Return, in the, you know, famous episode 8, the Trinity test site episode. Did you watch that, Hayley?
No, I didn't. I've never seen Twin Peaks because the most obnoxious people in high school were into it, so I just refused to watch it.
Well, if you ever make it as far as The Return, in episode 8 is like sort of a foundational episode because like it just stops kind of halfway through and then like restarts on like in black and white, where Lynch shows you the first detonation of an atomic weapon at the Trinity site. And like from there creates this kind of like bizarre kind of like threnody through which he essentially creates his own mythology about like how Bob and these other like sort of otherworldly figures and entities sort of entered our reality. It was like this epochal event, this savage violation of nature, which like tore the fabric of space-time itself and like let these evil or otherworldly forces like penetrate our reality.
I mean, that is basically
alien or otherwise. Yeah,
that is basically the story that you get in a lot of these cases. Is either you have these like very hippy-dippy aliens talking about how humans are going to destroy themselves and nuclear anything is dangerous and is just going to lead in the destruction of Earth, and they show you these videos of this, you know, they basically show you Threads, the 80s movie. And,
yeah,
very
oh my
depressed.
God, yeah.
And,
Jesus Christ, yeah.
And the other one you get is like entities who are talking about the damage that humans are doing to the, you know, like the other space.
Environments or,
it's
yeah.
not just well, I mean, you get the environment, but also like on a cosmic level that like our meddling with atomic energy is basically causing like untold devastation on planes of existence we're not aware of. You know, that like basically other universes, you know, other dimensions, for lack of a better word, are experiencing the knock-on effects of human, you know, nuclear testing. Like every time we test a nuclear weapon, like 1,000 fairy machine elves, you know, were evaporated instantly.
Yeah.
You know, that's the other thing you get, which does fit into that whole, Lynchian thing.
Yeah, but like I said, like as the X, like just using the X-Files as an example of like both the mythology it depicts, but also like how popular that show was in the 90s and like what it actually tapped into. Like I said earlier, is I think this 90s paranoia of like America emerging like unrivaled, of like our system of government and our way of life is like finally conclusively like that's it, we won, there's nothing else. There's nothing else for us to like look at really other than ourselves. And once we started looking at it, what we saw was like pretty sinister and horrifying. And like
I guess
completely,
that's why you stopped looking at the X.
Yeah. And like and the antithesis of like of the official story of like that, you know, we were we had to just start dominating the planet because of, you know, for freedom and democracy or things like that. And that, like, you know, it involves a huge amount of secrecy, of what we know now as a matter of public record, like the use of human beings as guinea pigs for all sorts of like, you know, Nazi level experimentation on them. The creation of
mutants, a lot of mutants in the X-Files. It's like that's something I shout at the television a lot. Is, she's a mutant. She's another. Scully's found more mutants. This keeps happening. But it's true. Like America
in the show and in reality.
In reality, like I don't know. It makes me think of things just like the lead in the water pipes all across America that causes like birth defects and means people have like less mental acuity as they develop because of lead poisoning, basically from childhood. Like, I mean, through even just inaction, the US, creates sewer mutants just as it does like deliberately in the X-Files,
Yeah. And overlaying all of it is this kind of like godlike surveillance state of hugely like unchecked by democratic or other means like power that is like secret and vast and unaccountable, even if the people involved in it are not necessarily like these genius level puppet masters who are in control of everything.
They're not the masterminds is the thing. It's like, they're all middle managers and they don't even necessarily know who their manager is the other thing. Like they is that like either it is, I mean, in the X-Files universe, there's an answer. There's like an ultimate authority that is controlling these things at some point. There's, always someone above in the food chain who is controlling things. I think in our reality, like that doesn't exist. And, like it's just,
this is the thing about how like all, this is the thing about how like all conspiracy theories at some level like are kind of a coping mechanism because they all do posit that there is something or someone in control of everything.
Yeah.
Rather than the fact that it's just like a, ongoing cascade of disaster.
I'd say, and the X-Files I think is a good presentation of this because it also like pretty firmly tells you like as much as Mulder is on the right track, it's obviously it's not good for him to be on this track either. Like he's like damaging himself and his like psyche by going into this like warfare with the deep state and trying to uncover the truth.
A sane better Mulder would have just shot his shot with Scully in like the first season. They'd be happily together. She would retire, maybe go into private medical practice. He would be a lawyer or something.
He and her sister would still be alive.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe her dad and everyone else. But it presents, I think, quite well the dangers of conspiratorial thinking, and how off the track it will get you. And I think that's like the thing to come back to of all of this is what I would say with all of this stuff is that the truth doesn't matter. Like Mulder is obsessed with finding the truth and you will never find the truth. It doesn't exist. Like there's no like empirical like focal point of reality you can get to that will explain all the things in your life. That's never going to happen.
And even if you did, it wouldn't matter.
And if you think you've found that, you're delusional. Like, it doesn't matter if it's like, some sort of religious thing, like whatever your explanation is. It isn't an explanation. It's just something you tell yourself so you don't have to worry about these things. And someone like Mulder, is someone who's gone too far down the rabbit hole and is driving themselves insane because they're getting obsessed over the tiny little details and the things that will confirm or provide some more light on. It doesn't matter. All this stuff, I think, is just about creating what is good to take from it is just like a general sense of distrust in government and media and any institution of power in any story you are told. Is just to be suspicious and like critical, and also be open to other people's experiences. And like Mulder, one of the great things about him is that he's like fairly non-judgmental, and he takes people he takes the victims at their word of what happened to them and works with that. He doesn't bring in his own paradigm. This is like the way Scully does and tries to work on it only on her terms. He tries to work on these cases in the terms of the victims. And like that's like sense of empathy is something I think you can take. I think like the important thing in the X-Files is just this is the general story, is that this general sense of distrust. And obviously people didn't learn that because you roll out of that into like the post 9/11 period is just the furthest
definitely.
remove from that
and
X-Files mindset.
I was going to say, like, ultimately, like, coming out of the 90s, and like you said, why there hasn't been like the same, I don't know, resurgence or reportings of these incidents among people like in the 21st century is like, again, like after 9/11, like, guess what? Like, America, we now have like another united purpose and like another global level bad guy to obsess over. And I think that sort of did away with a lot of both the need to fill in these gaps in our own, like the way we look at the world and our own lives and the conduct of the country we live in, but also like obliterated like any like acceptance of like a public like skepticism or distrust
You
of the
also
military
have
or government.
a justification. You have a reason for these things happening, and the reason is like terrorism and freedom. Like, you have an explanation. Like, these things are still happening. All the bad things the government is doing, and I mean, like, we knew they were happening. It was not like we knew Iraq War was bad. We knew that these people were just being tortured and innocent people were being blown apart just for no reason, and things like Abu Ghraib. Like, we knew all of these horrible things were still happening, but we did elite. But now we had a way to kind of to compartmentalize it and reason it away because, well, it's for national security. The terrorists, it's for defense. It's about protecting us. Is that you actually have something like 9/11 provides you with like, whoa, we can't let that happen again. Like, it provides you with a thing to fear to allow you to be okay of these things happening, which I guess in the 90s, like, what were you fighting to protect by, you're ignoring these things to protect some national purpose was less important. Whereas I guess like the same way that like the liberals who are like doing the believe Biden hashtag or whatever, like they have something they're aware of what's going on and what, he's been doing, but they have something they want to protect.
But also, they have something they want to protect, so there's stakes involved in terms of like the psychological barriers.
They have a reason
not
to think about it and to sort of switch off that critical aspect and just accept what's happening. And I guess like we have too much purpose. We have too much at stake.
I guess to get into like the like absolute present moment, like I guess the interesting thing now is that like now 20 years gone into like the war on terror, like I would contend that like the war on terrorism like stopped really being like something of real like emotional or like immediate like purpose or valence in American life. Like as soon as Obama became president, it all just kind of faded into the background and like no one was really like concerned about it anymore. It was just essentially taken care of. It was going on in the background. And like now, like for the most part, like people don't really give a shit about terrorism anymore. Like, I mean, I guess they do in the abstract or if you ask them in a poll, but it's like not an immediate concern that like,
of terrorism and what they associate that fear with has changed. Like it's sort of merged into like this, like the Blue Lives Matter thing is like an extension of like the war on terror mindset to me.
Yeah, it's just like it's the same thing as like the X-Files in the 90s. It's just sort of be turning inward once again, and like where like your real source of fear is like your neighbors or like yourself. It's like it's in this country. It's like it's the call is coming from inside the house.
I will say the Obama, the Obama period was a pretty good time for like conspiracy culture. Like that's when I was like growing up and got into all of this stuff super heavy, and I was an above top secret every day, was like the Obama period. And it was like, you talk about on Chapo a lot, you guys talk about like that kind of, liberal safety not to think about things during Obama, like, like the protest signs like saying, if Hillary was president, we'd be at lunch right now. And like the Obama presidency, it kind of gave you a chance to like not have to worry about like all these war crimes and things happening.
Yeah.
Because someone like an adult, someone sensible and well spoken and smart was in charge.
The guy when you saw on TV, you were like reassured by. You were like, oh, he's like me,
And so it gave people the chance to play in their little mind palaces. And we got some great conspiracies in that period. And also it set the right wing into such a fever pitch that they just came up with some great ideas and content.
Yeah,
Some of
absolutely.
the best stuff happened. I mean, thankfully, with QAnon, like we've now got like a new version of that, but like FEMA camps and the death panels, like all of that stuff was was a lot of fun. Like
Operation Jade Helm.
oh, Jade Helm, yeah.
And again, like, and also like, and these are like all overlaid on already existing like conspiracy tropes and little like ticks. Like one of my favorite things about like Jade Helm was that every Walmart in the country was connected through a network of underground tunnels.
Which is
and it's
true.
like, yeah, I mean those underground tunnels exist. I don't know if they connect every Walmart, but like again,
What if
those
they
underground
just-
tunnels were created at exactly the same time that like the sort of Cold War nuclear security state was as well. Like they all exist for
Underground
some
tunnels freak
purpose.
me out. I think it's just
Yeah, and they're a
thing of
huge
enclosed
part.
spaces.
Oh yeah,
But like,
every major conspiracy at some point delves into the existence of an underground network of
well,
tunnels.
and the other thing is the tunnels. They exist. Like
they actually do exist.
You
I don't
can't
know at
deny
what
that.
level or for what
I mean,
purpose.
like, my
but
city has a bunch of underground tunnels. Like there's an underground tunnel that connects to like a fancy private girls' school in like one of the nice suburbs. They have an underground tunnel that leads from like the principal's office. I can't remember where. I'm not exactly sure where it leads to, but there's a few. And I did like for a while. I was tempted to try and do urban exploring and get into the tunnels, but after reading about the only person I know who did go into the tunnels had to immediately be hospitalized after he came out because it was just like filled with sewer water and rats and tetanus. But yeah, these tunnels exist.
that just sounds like a sewer. No.
I've been in the sewers as well. Like they're fine, but you can get to if you want. I mean, like if you want to find out the truth about the tunnels, if you go into a sewer network, they eventually do all connect to the underground tunnel systems in your city. So it is just an easy access point. New York has underground tunnels. You've got like
Oh my God! We
From
got thousands of miles.
It's
Most of them
like-
are not even occupied. They're like most of
you've
them are
got,
like
all
yeah.
of these. If you just dig anywhere in New York, from what I can tell, there's like a secret underground train station from like the 1920s that looks amazing. That's just been shut off and cemented over. There's like some sort of underground population of mole people, from what I understand. There, like there's a lot going on.
Oh yeah. New York City is if you're into tunnels, New York City and Manhattan in particular is
And of
just
course,
nothing but
like in LA, you've got all of those underground tunnels connecting all the pedophile preschools. Like,
yeah, and all the major Hollywood studios, I'm sure. But again, like it's like whether you believe it, whether like the underground tunnel network thing is like something that is you believe 100% literally to be true.
and Elon Musk,
like
is
as a
publicly trying to build underground tunnels for the elites.
that carry one car at a time
They
to
can
deal with
carry-
the horrible problem.
Yeah, it's their thing. It's like one car, one boot, one child to be sacrificed.
yeah. One elite and like 2 to 3 sex slaves. In
And
a
that's the
regular
other thing is that like we are in the age of Epstein, the most extreme. I don't know. Like looking at X-Files, there's a lot of episodes about like satanic pedophile stuff. And had I watched like X-Files before the Epstein stuff, I'd just feel like, oh yeah, this is funny. It's just making fun of like right-wing conspiracies. And now it's like, oh shit, this is literally happening.
yeah, but like I said, like the UFO stuff, like the Area 51, unidentified flying objects in general, but like or the secret network of underground tunnels. Like again, to me, like it's fascinating because whether you believe them to be like literally 100% true, like like the facts or details of it, or like trying to like make it all line up and work out, or even if you don't, what you get is essentially like a pretty good metaphor for, like I said, this like an underground like paranoid network of like power, history, and culture that is like literally and metaphorically underground and connects everything around you, even though you're not aware of it.
Yeah, you
And
can't.
like that to me is I think what is resonant about the idea.
I'd agree. Like, I don't think you should. I think you should read the stories. The stories are interesting. People's eyewitness accounts. It's all interesting. but you can't get too caught up in that because it will drive you insane. You have to, like, it's like the Epstein thing. Like, you get Epstein brain. It's not good.
Yeah.
It's bad vibes. It will freak you out. You just have to know that, like, you just have to be able to look at this stuff and go, yeah, obviously that shit is happening. Like, you know, and it's
also,
nothing
like,
I can really do about it.
And like, yeah, ultimately, like, nothing productive is going to come out of your efforts in this regard, other than like you being aware of like an interesting story.
Unless you find a way to work the grift, like, unless you find a way to, you know, make your direct-to-YouTube documentary series and make a living off the Patreon supporting that, like, there's no real point unless, like, you do, like, you know, a Chapo grift on these things. I'd say the thing about all this stuff is it's a good lens to look at the world through. Because I think if you take the Greypill and you look at everything of this level of suspicion, I think it's a pretty good, like, way to look at the world, and you'll probably come out with, like, a better understanding of power and the role of government and how none of these things actually work for you than, like, the liberal mindset will give you. Like, you're much better off being fucking X-Files poisoned than West Wing poisoned.
Yes. I mean, I guess, like, just to get up to, like, our very, like, current moment, right? Pentagon confirming the authenticity of these UFO videos taken by, you know, Navy pilots. But, like, now we're living in this, like, also very bizarre, seemingly out of an X-Files episode, like, quarantine year zero, like, plague reality. And now, like, I see the sort of the UFO story being woven into that as well, particularly as an explanation for, like, why these videos and why now. And it's either they're giving you, like, a tidbit of something tantalizing to distract you from what they're really doing, which is, like, I don't know, keeping everyone indoors so that they can
5G.
prepare, like, the rollout of 5G, or, like, the culling of the global population, or putting Jeffrey Epstein's cum inside your body.
I don't know if you saw this video, but there's, like, these huge, like, Slender Man creatures of, like, cone heads that are walking around emanating 5G. I don't know if you saw that viral video. Like,
I have not seen that video.
Okay, well, look out for those. But, like, that's what's going on. That's why they're giving us inside.
But, like, okay, like that like, with the explanation I give you is that, like, oh, like, the government is doing what they always do, and that this is, like, the UFOs have always been a distraction that they've been in control of to either cover up for their experimental aircraft technology or abducting and experimenting on human subjects, right? And that, like, aliens is like that. Yeah, sure, we know this happens, and that, like, UFOs are, like, a perfect pop cultural explanation for that, because you get people interested in investigating it and researching it, and that, like, you know, it's a distraction essentially.
I've been thinking a lot about. Sorry, but
no, go ahead.
The thing I've been thinking a lot about lately, because my brain is, like, shot. It's just fucked. It's just been stuck in my head, is the idea of, like, false consciousness projects. And I realized, you know, basically everything is a false consciousness project. And, like, the UFO thing could be to an extent, but I would say, like, it is you are on a less dangerous path getting caught up in UFOs than you are if you got caught up in, like, electoralism. Which is, like, as big, like, a false consciousness project to trap you within, like, this narrow, confined mindset of possibilities and the possibility of your actions. You know, something like electoralism is, like, you know, designed to constrain what you can do as a person and your ability to organize, because it keeps you within these very narrow boundaries that basically says, you know, you go vote and then you stop doing the thinking, except to donate to, like, Nancy Pelosi so she can buy, like, more ice cream from the Satanic Mill. And, you know, like, that is, and lots of people are very engaged in electoralism, and, you know, they're like, right now, angrily, you know, putting posts on the Patreon page demanding to know why you were talking about fucking aliens and not Howie Hawkins. You know, like, those people are
who is an alien, by the way.
People invested in that. You know, the people who are, like, watching Matt's streams where he's, like, you know, delving into new forms of consciousness and demanding to know what he thinks of the Green Party. Like, those people are way more deranged than any UFO person, because the UFO people are at least concerned with finding some sort of truth and meaning in the universe. Whereas those people, I don't know what the fuck they want, what they expect. And so, yeah, like, people are trying to say that, like, the UFO thing, the Pentagon videos, any sort of delving into the UFO phenomenon is, like, basically, is that false consciousness project? Is this trap that the government wants you to fall into, to look into this topic as a way to keep you from looking at what's important, which is, I don't know, the Supreme Court justice allocation or something. Like, that's the thing that drives me mad about all these people who have been dismissing this thing from, is that they're all just like, oh, the videos aren't even interesting. All they show is, like, superior advanced technology beyond the human capability. It's not very interesting. And besides, anyway, it's just like the government trying to, why do they, Trump, yet another genius move by Trump to distract us from they think that Trump needs any help. He's the president. He's been the president he's going to be the president forever. This is, and there's nothing they can do to stop that. But it's like, yeah, you guys, like, the liberals have done such a bad job at doing anything to stop Trump that, like, he doesn't need to do UFO disclosure to help him. So yeah, I don't know. It's just that, like, with all of this sort of dismissal of it, I just find infuriating, and I've been getting into a lot of fights with, like, leftists on Twitter because they want to say that this is like a psyop, that this is like a CIA op to protect Trump and to distract from the important issues like Howie Hawkins' nomination. And it's just not the case. Like, it's just, I mean, obviously, to say
it
that
could be, I don't know.
Obviously they're using it, but that's what happens whenever a story comes out from the media, it's an op. I mean, like, it's a story. It's what they're doing is they're putting out a story. They have a reason for putting it out. They have a response they want to garner, whether that's just like clicks and engagement or creating some sort of, fake controversy around a topic, trying to gin up anger for some political end. Like, every story in the media exists for a reason. And obviously, this is no different, but that goes for everything. Like, everything is a psyop, and it'd be like saying that, like, the New York Times reporting on any other kind of issue is just a distraction from what your thing is. And what it really is that you just want to talk about the thing that you're interested in. And any distraction from that is obviously sinister. But yeah.
And, I think you can take some solace in this, is that, like, that's one way of looking at why these disclosures have just happened and why we're all stuck inside our fucking apartments, losing our minds, atomized, incapable of physically organizing or registering our discontent unless you're angry that you can't get a haircut or whatever. The other thing I've heard is that all of this quarantine and the pandemic is just a cover to keep everyone indoors for when the actual alien invasion and colonization begins this month. So look forward to that, everybody.
Well,
because we're neatly quarantined and ready for, I don't know,
there's
to
a
be
reason
disposed
why
of or put to work.
They decided to roll out 5G right now. Like, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen the black vans, like, rolling out 5G. Although, shit, the X-Files episode, like, I watched the other day, it was, like, about the, implanting sinister signals in TV to turn people evil. So who knows? But, yeah, look, I'd say is that people latching on to this being a distraction and stuff, it's, to me, very similar to, like, it's basically like if you said, it's like the 9/11 truthers, 9/11 was put to use for a political means as, like, justification for the war in Iraq and creating a war on terror and increasing the size of the national security state. Therefore, 9/11 must have been an op. Like, the fact that the US government used it to their own ends means they must have blown up the towers themselves, instead of like power just taking advantage of a situation, and
Right.
and so like I think just because they might be taking advantage of UFO disclosure to distract from everything else going on in the government doesn't mean that UFO disclosure isn't real, and that what's the argument that like these videos are like, one is like from 2005, one is from 2012. Is the argument that the Trump government created fake UFOs like 10 years ago so that today there would be like a fake video to distract from Trump's latest scandal? Like,
Yes, and it's the same reason Tara Reid started this plot back in like 1992 to unseat the chance of Biden becoming president in the year 2020.
Yeah, or why Chapo was created by the FSB and disrupt
Right.
the Hillary Clinton campaign. Like, none of these
sure, they took
explanations-
advantage of it, but they
None of these
didn't create
explanations
it.
make sense. It's just like, Chapo wasn't created by the FSB, but the CIA just used it as, a means to disrupt the Democratic nomination and make Trump president. That's pretty obvious. But, doesn't mean they created Chapo. It just means that they invested in its creation.
It just means that like half of their Patreon accounts are created by some sort of shady government agency.
From what I understand, you guys are basically bankrupt because
Yes,
no one is
that's
supporting
true.
you on Patreon anymore because they've become aware of the Chapo to Fash pipeline.
Well, they should be aware of it's more of a secret tunnel system than a pipeline.
Honestly,
Let's put
like
it that
Gwen
way.
Snyder, I was thinking, is like a good example of like getting too concerned with the facts over like the general reality of the situation, of someone who has like a meaningful distrust of like, institutions, I guess, and the media, and so has like, is rightfully suspicious of podcasts and shit. Like, yeah, there's probably, there's like podcasts that could be used to create narratives and so on. But she's just become so obsessed with like the details and the facts and the little connections that you can make and all those little fiddly bits that she's completely lost sight of the overall picture. And her latest thing where she like declared victory over Chapo for you like having 35 less patrons this month or something, and has declared, that she's for once and forever destroyed Chapo Trap House and ended the road of Fash Pipeline, is not that different from like, it's like when prophecy fails kind of stuff. It's like she's, not that different from the cult leaders who have like realized, okay, this grift is kind of up. It's time to get everyone to drink the Kool-Aid. And declare victory and say, well, now our mission is done. And, I think that's like she's evidence of the danger of becoming too obsessed with the details of the conspiracy rather than just like using it to sort of inoculate yourself and be like, okay, everything is clearly bullshit and I have to take it all with a level of suspicion. And that's what, these conspiracies, that's helpful to take from them is to not trust anything too much and to always be critical and, and try and understand how power works in all forms, of any relationship with the government or just individuals, and to be aware of that dynamic.
I think that is a good place to wrap things up, and I will leave you of the two catchphrases from the X-Files. The truth is out there. Don't put too much stock in that. Even if it is out there, it won't do you any good. It's the other one, trust no one, that you should hold more, closer to heart.
Unfortunately, because I am someone who reads all the alien stories, the one that like really stuck out to me is the data's set. They said that recently, and like that is unfortunately like that's true. I mean, on one level, it's true because if you read what like people like Nigel Kerner have uncovered about like the alien conspiracy, is that basically the mission is done. From everything that, like I was saying earlier about how like there aren't as many kind of encounter reports and anything. The reason for that is that the alien greys have already accomplished their mission and all the work is kind of done. so not
The
having
5G network is in place. Yeah.
and if you want to, so on one level there's that. On the other level, like kind of the date is set, like climate change. We're pretty clear, like when we're in the narrow part of the tunnel, and there's really no maneuvering at this point, and it's just about like trying to survive in a way that you'll be personally quite well off for yourself, and in that sense, the date is set. So, I mean, there's no point to anything, so you may as well just read. You may as well just read, take this time to read up on alien lore, because it's also a good distraction because they're good stories.
They are good stories. I think we'll leave you on that very hopeful note. But Hayley, thank you very much for joining me and discussing UFOs. And I would love to talk to you again sometime about like your favorite UFO stories and bits of lore that are a bit
there's
less well known than Roswell, and maybe dive into Mothman and